Picture this. It's 1861, and while Americans back east are tearing each other apart in a civil war that will consume 600,000 lives, something equally momentous is unfolding in the American Southwest. Here, in a landscape that would make Mars look hospitable, the Chiricahua Apache control a territory larger than all of New England combined. We're talking about roughly 70,000 square miles of the most unforgiving terrain on the continent, mountains that scrape the sky, deserts that can kill you in a dozen different ways, and canyons so deep that sunlight reaches the bottom for maybe 3 hours a day. And ruling over this empire of stone and sand is a man whose very name makes grown Mexican soldiers cross themselves and whisper prayers. Mangas coloradas. Red Sleeves stands 6 feet 4 inches tall, in an era when the average man barely reaches 5.5 feet. Think of him as the Apache equivalent of a medieval king, except his castle is the entire southwestern wilderness, and his army knows every rock, every hidden spring, every secret trail across 250,000 square miles. But here's what makes this story so fascinating and so tragic. The Apache world isn't built on conquest or expansion like European empires. It revolves around something far more elegant, sacred cycles that have sustained these people for 1,000 years. Picture families moving with the seasons like clockwork, following patterns their great-great-grandparents established. Spring means climbing into the mountains to harvest mescal, the heart of the agave plant that requires 3 days of roasting in underground pits. Summer brings hunting parties, tracking deer and elk through pine forests that exist in isolated mountain islands surrounded by desert. Autumn means gathering piñon nuts, a protein-rich harvest that can sustain families through winter. Every meal, and I mean every single meal, begins with prayers to the mountain spirits, those sacred beings who dwell in the 4 directions and watch over Apache families. Imagine the smoke from cooking fires rising at dawn, carrying those prayers skyward while children learn the stories that connect them to their ancestors and their land. This isn't just survival, this is a civilization as sophisticated as any in human history, perfectly adapted to one of the most challenging environments on Earth. But then, in 1859, everything changes. Prospectors find gold in the Pinos Altos Mountains, Apache sacred ground where their spirits dwell. Within 2 years, 20,000 fortune seekers pour into the homeland like locusts. 20,000. To put that in perspective, that's more people than lived in most American cities at the time. They come with picks and shovels and dreams of striking it rich, but what they bring to Apache country is ecological catastrophe. Picture streams that have run clear for millennia suddenly choked with mining silt. Game animals, deer, elk, bighorn sheep fleeing from the constant noise of picks striking rock and the smoke from processing fires. Ancient camping grounds bulldozed for mining claims. Sacred springs fouled with mercury used to extract gold from ore. The Apache watch their carefully maintained world dissolving before their eyes. Now, let me take you into a specific morning in this world that's about to explode. It's sometime in the early 1850s, and we're with a young Apache man known then as Goyakla, the one who yawns, though history will remember him by a different name entirely. He's sharing breakfast with his mother, his wife Alope, and their 3 children around their family fire. The smoke mingles with dozens of others rising from their peaceful camp, creating a haze that catches the early morning light filtering through cottonwood trees. Can you see it? Children laughing as they chase each other between wickiups, those ingenious dome-shaped shelters that can be assembled in NRA 30 minutes and provide perfect insulation against desert heat and mountain cold. Women grinding corn with stone metates that produce a rhythm like a gentle heartbeat. Men checking weapons and discussing the day's plans while sipping tiswin, a mild corn beer that's part of morning socializing. Goyakla kisses his wife goodbye. They've been married for several years now, and their love story is the kind that makes other Apache couples envious. He hugs his children, probably teasing them about helping their grandmother with chores while he's gone. Then he rides south with other men toward Llanos, Mexico, to trade for supplies they need: cloth, metal tools, maybe some coffee beans that have become a cherished luxury. But while the men are gone, trusting in treaties and trade agreements, Mexican soldiers attack the peaceful camp. When Goyakla returns, he finds a scene that will haunt him for the rest of his life. His mother dead, his wife Alope dead, all three of his children dead, their cooking pots smashed, their food stores burned, their wickiup collapsed and scattered. That night, this broken young man sits alone where his family's fire once burned. The ashes are cold now, like his heart, like his future. And it's here, in this moment of absolute despair, that something extraordinary happens. In Apache tradition, grief this profound can open doorways to the spirit world. Goyakla has what we might call a vision, but what Apache people know as direct communication with powers beyond our understanding. A voice speaks to him, whether from within or without. No one can say. But the message is clear and will prove prophetic. No gun will ever kill you. From this moment forward, the one who yawns dies with his family, and someone far more dangerous is born. But personal tragedy is only the beginning. Soon, an even greater betrayal will shatter Apache faith in American promises forever. At Apache Pass, that crucial mountain corridor where travelers must stop for water, Cochise, the greatest of Apache leaders, meets with American officials under a flag of truce. The meeting is supposed to resolve tensions, to find a peaceful path forward. Instead, the Americans seize Cochise's brother and nephews, accusing them of crimes they didn't commit. When Cochise refuses to confess to cattle theft he knows nothing about, the Americans make a decision that will cost thousands of lives. They hang his relatives while he watches, their bodies left swaying in the desert wind as a message to all Apache people. The response is swift and terrible. For every Apache killed, 10 Americans or Mexicans will die. The mathematical precision of this vengeance isn't random, it's calculated to send an unmistakable message. You want to play by the rules of total war? Very well. The desert will run red with blood for the next 25 years. And somewhere in the gathering storm, the young man once known as Goyakla prepares to become the warrior the world will remember as Geronimo, a name that will make soldiers wake up screaming from nightmares, a name that will echo through history as the very embodiment of Apache resistance. But how do you hunt ghosts who know every hidden spring across 250,000 square miles? How do you catch warriors who can travel 70 miles in a day through terrain that breaks cavalry horses? That's the impossible task facing 5,000 American soldiers as they prepare to chase 38 Apache through 2 nations. The greatest manhunt in American history is about to begin. 24 years have passed since that cold night when Goyakla sat by his family's ashes, and by 1885, the impossible has become reality. 5,000 American soldiers, that's more troops than George Washington commanded at Valley Forge, are hunting 38 Apache men, women, and children across 2 nations. Add to that 500 Apache scouts and 3,000 Mexican troops, and you're looking at the largest manhunt in North American history. All this firepower, all this technology, all this military might focused on a group smaller than a typical high school graduating class. But here's what makes this pursuit so extraordinary. The hunted aren't running in panic. They're conducting a masterclass in guerrilla warfare that would make modern special forces weep with envy. Picture Geronimo's band moving 70 miles in a single day through terrain so brutal that pursuing cavalry horses collapse after 20 miles. These aren't superhuman feats, they're the result of generations of accumulated knowledge, passed down through bloodlines that stretch back to the time when mammoths roamed this continent. Every hidden spring across 250,000 square miles is mapped in Apache memory, every box canyon that could serve as ambush site, every secret trail carved through volcanic rock by ancestors who understood this land like a lover's touch. It's all there, encoded in the minds of people who've made survival an art form. When Army scouts find Apache tracks heading into what looks like solid cliff face, they're not seeing things. They're witnessing navigation skills that make GPS look primitive. But the real genius of Apache warfare isn't just knowing the terrain, it's understanding the psychology of pursuit. While soldiers march in predictable columns, following established roads and camping in defensible positions, Apache warriors strike settlements in Arizona, vanish into Mexico's Sierra Madre Mountains, then reappear hundreds of miles away before telegraph operators can even send word of the first attack. It's warfare as performance art, designed to drive enemies insane with frustration. And leading this ghost dance is the man formerly known as Goyakla, now bearing a name that makes children hide under blankets. Geronimo. Some say the name comes from Mexican soldiers crying out to Saint Jerome for protection when they saw him coming. Others claim it's corruption of his Apache name. But walk into any saloon from Tucson to El Paso and mention that name, watch grown men reach for whiskey bottles with shaking hands. Yet even ghosts need allies, and Geronimo has perhaps the most remarkable war party in military history. There's Lozan, Victorio's sister, a warrior whose spiritual gifts are legendary even among Apache people famous for their spiritual power. Apache oral tradition says she can hold up her hands, turn slowly in a circle, and feel the direction of enemies through vibrations that travel through the earth itself. Soldiers who've witnessed her in action swear she always knows exactly where they're positioned, as if she has access to intelligence networks beyond human understanding. Then there's Naiche, son of the great Cochise, carrying the weight of his father's legacy while trying to keep his own children alive in this endless chase. And Chapo, Geronimo's son, barely 18 years old, but already showing the tactical brilliance that runs in his bloodline. These aren't savage raiders, they're military strategists conducting operations that would challenge graduate students at West Point. But the United States Army has finally found a commander who understands the fundamental truth about fighting Apache. You cannot defeat them with conventional tactics. General George Crook, the Apache call him Gray Fox, with grudging respect, realizes that sending cavalry charging across desert is like trying to catch lightning with a butterfly net. Instead, he does something that tears at the very soul of Apache society. He recruits Apache scouts to hunt their own relatives. Think about the moral complexity here. Warriors like Chato and Mickey Free face an impossible choice. Watch their own children starve while remaining loyal to Geronimo's cause, or guide soldiers to camps where their cousins and nephews might be sleeping. The promises are specific and heartbreaking. Guaranteed food rations for their families, protection from military retaliation, and most important of all, schools for their children, who might otherwise face a future with no options beyond warfare or starvation. Every morning, these Apache scouts wake up knowing they might track down and capture relatives they played with as children. Every trail they follow for the army might lead to a wiki-up where their aunt is teaching traditional stories to grandchildren they've never met. This isn't just military service, it's a form of spiritual suicide that violates everything Apache culture teaches about family loyalty and clan obligations. But the net is tightening. Railroads bring fresh troops faster than horses can travel. Heliograph stations flash mirror signals across mountaintops, creating a communication network that moves information at the speed of light. Telegraph lines carry orders from Washington to field commanders in hours rather than weeks. For the first time in Apache history, their enemies can coordinate responses faster than warriors can strike and disappear. Most devastating of all, former hideaways that have sheltered Apache families for generations are no longer secret. Sacred springs where great-grandmothers once taught children to pray, Apache scouts now guide soldiers directly to these locations. Caves where winter food supplies have been cached for decades, troops arrive to find them and destroy everything, leaving no backup resources for desperate families. In September 1886, the inevitable finally happens. Surrounded, exhausted, watching children grow weak from hunger while soldiers close in from every direction, Geronimo agrees to meet General Nelson Miles at Skeleton Canyon. Picture this moment: the most feared warrior in North America, the man whose name has terrified two nations, standing in a desolate stretch of desert that looks like the end of the world. The words he speaks will echo through history. Once I moved about like the wind. Now I surrender to you, and that is all. As he lays down his rifle, something dies in the American West that can never be resurrected, the age when indigenous peoples could still challenge the expanding United States on anything approaching equal terms. But surrendering to soldiers is one thing. What comes next will test Apache endurance in ways that warfare never could. Because ahead lies a train journey that will carry them not just across geography, but across the boundary between freedom and captivity, between homeland and exile, between the world they've always known and a nightmare beyond their darkest imaginings. The train that pulls away from the surrender site in September 1886 isn't just transportation. It's a time machine carrying its passengers backward into history's darkest chapters. 442 Apache prisoners, including women, children, and elderly grandparents who've never committed any crime beyond the accident of their birth, are packed into cattle cars designed for livestock. The irony would be poetic if it weren't so horrific. People who've spent their lives moving freely across vast landscapes are now caged in wooden boxes that rattle and sway across an alien continent. Picture the first hours of this journey. Children screaming in the suffocating heat as desert temperatures climb toward 100 degrees. Warriors who have never known walls clawing at wooden slats, trying to see where they're being taken. Pregnant women gasping for air in the stifling darkness, while train wheels click out a rhythm that sounds like a death march. Some prisoners haven't been inside any kind of structure for their entire lives. Even Apache wiki-ups have openings to the sky and can be dismantled in minutes. Now they're trapped in rolling prisons with no escape, no horizons, no connection to the earth that has sustained them for generations. As the train rolls eastward, Apache prisoners watch their world disappear through gaps in cattle car slats. The mountains that contain their sacred places shrink to distant bumps on the horizon. The desert scrub that's provided medicine and food for 1,000 years gives way to grasslands they've never seen. Then comes the truly alien landscape. Cities with more people than have ever existed in Apache imagination. Factories belching smoke that darkens the sky. Farmland carved into geometric patterns that make no sense to people who understand land as a living entity rather than property to be owned. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepares them for Fort Marion, Florida. Built by Spanish conquistadors in the 16th century, this star-shaped fortress represents everything Apache people have fought against for decades. Its stone walls, thick enough to stop cannonballs, were designed to intimidate indigenous peoples and establish European dominance. Now, these same walls will hold Apache warriors whose ancestors successfully resisted Spanish, Mexican, and American expansion for over 300 years. Walk through the entrance to Fort Marion, and you're stepping into a perfectly preserved nightmare. The walls weep constantly from humidity that makes breathing feel like drowning. Mosquitoes carry malaria and yellow fever, diseases completely unknown in the high desert country where Apache immune systems evolved. The air itself is poison-thick, humid, laden with microorganisms that attack respiratory systems adapted to thin, dry mountain air. Within the first year, 50 prisoners die. 50! These aren't battle casualties, they're deaths from diseases that don't exist in Apache homeland, complicated by despair that modern psychiatrists would recognize as severe clinical depression. But here's what makes these deaths particularly tragic. Their bodies are buried in Florida soil, thousands of miles from the sacred mountains where Apache spirits can find rest. In Apache belief, this isn't just death, it's spiritual exile that continues beyond the died grave. Then comes a moment that crystallizes everything about cultural destruction and human resilience. It's a humid morning sometime in late 1886, and prison guards are serving the Apache their first American breakfast. The meal seems innocent enough. Bacon, scrambled eggs, bread, coffee. But watch what happens as these warriors' men who've faced cavalry charges without flinching encounter food that represents everything they've lost. Chapo, Geronimo's son, takes a bite of bacon and suddenly breaks down weeping. Not from the taste, but from memory. That salt and smoke flavor brings back his grandmother cooking venison over mesquite coals, the smell mixing with juniper smoke and morning prayers. He remembers her teaching him which cuts were reserved for elders, how to offer the first portion to mountain spirits, how sharing food strengthened family bonds that connected him to every Apache who had ever lived. The warrior Perico touches scrambled eggs with his finger and starts sobbing uncontrollably. He's remembering his 6-year-old daughter gathering quail eggs in spring canyons, her laughter echoing off red rock walls as she discovered each perfectly speckled treasure. She died on the train East Fever, took her somewhere in Texas, and now these yellow eggs taste like grief itself. One by one, hardened fighters who charged into gunfire without hesitation crumble over this simple meal. Not because they're weak, but because they're human beings whose entire world has been systematically destroyed. Every bite reminds them of communal meals where no one ate until elders were served first. They remember foods blessed by prayers, shared in celebration, connected to seasons and ceremonies that gave life meaning. Now they sit on wooden benches in a stone room that echoes with emptiness, eating in enforced silence while guards watch nervously. The bacon and eggs taste of exile, of traditions interrupted, of children who will never learn the sigil, prayers that make food sacred. Prison guards stand bewildered, not understanding that they're witnessing the collision of two civilizations, one that views meals as fuel for individual bodies, another that sees food as communion with ancestors, family, and the spiritual forces that sustain all life. The tears flowing down Apache faces aren't just personal grief, they're mourning for an entire way of being in the world. Every forced bite confirms that their children will grow up disconnected from the land that taught their people how to live. The salt of bacon mingles with the salt of tears shed for grandmothers they'll never see again, for ceremonies that will die with the elders, for a language that's forbidden in this stone prison. But here's what the guards don't understand, what prison administrators can't comprehend. Even in this moment of absolute despair, something indestructible survives. The same tears that express bottomless grief also carry forward the memory of what's been lost. Every sob contains the echo of children's laughter, the taste of traditional foods, the warmth of family fires, because ahead lie 27 years of captivity, the longest imprisonment of any Native American group in United States history. And in those decades, these tears will transform into something else entirely, the foundation for cultural survival that will carry Apache identity into the 20th century and beyond. 27 years. Think about that number for a moment. 27 years of captivity, longer than Nelson Mandela's imprisonment, longer than most people spend in education from kindergarten through graduate school. For 27 years, Apache prisoners remain wards of the United States government, shuffled between military posts like chess pieces in a game they're not allowed to understand. From the stone dungeons of Fort Marion, Florida, to the swamplands of Mount Vernon Barracks, Alabama, and finally to the rolling plains of Fort Sill, Oklahoma always moving, never home. But within this epic span of forced exile, individual stories emerge that reveal both the cruelty of American policy and the indestructible nature of human dignity. Take Geronimo himself, the once feared war leader who becomes perhaps the most famous prisoner in American history. By 1904, he's literally a tourist attraction, selling photographs of himself for $2 each at the St. Louis World's Fair, while curious visitors gawk at the savage who once terrorized the Southwest. Picture this surreal scene. The man whose name made cavalry officers wake up screaming now poses for family photos with middle-class Americans who want to show their friends they met the famous Apache. He signs autographs with an X, having learned just enough English to say, "Me, Geronimo," and count money. The irony is staggering. The warrior who spent his life fighting American expansion is now helping to fund it by serving as entertainment for the very people whose ancestors destroyed his world. But the true obscenity comes in 1905, when President Theodore Roosevelt invites Geronimo to march in his inaugural parade down Pennsylvania Avenue. Imagine the symbolism. The most successful indigenous resistance leader in American history parading before cheering crowds as a trophy of conquest, wearing a top hat and riding in a carriage, while politicians wave to voters who helped elect them by promising to civilize the frontier. Yet behind this grotesque theater, the real destruction continues in ways that cut deeper than any military defeat. Apache children, some as young as 6 years old, are shipped to Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania, where the official motto declares the institution's purpose with chilling clarity: "Kill the Indian, save the man." Their hair is cut short, a devastating cultural violation since Apache tradition holds that hair contains spiritual power. Their names are changed from sacred Apache words to English ones chosen from phone books. They're beaten for speaking their native language, punished for practicing traditional customs, forced to march in military formation while reciting pledges to the same flag that flew over the soldiers who killed their grandparents. Many of these children never return home, not because they don't want to, but because they die of tuberculosis, pneumonia, and other diseases in dormitories that feel more like prisons than schools. Those who survive often face an impossible choice: return to reservation life, where their government-mandated education makes them outsiders, or try to make their way in a white world that will never fully accept them. Imagine the psychological torture of being told your family's way of life is savage, while being trained for jobs in a society that sees you as permanently inferior. Meanwhile, not all Apache accept their fate passively. The warrior Maasai provides one of the most extraordinary escape stories in American history. Sometime during the train journey east, he slips away from guards and begins walking 2,000 miles across terrain he's never seen, following star patterns his grandfather taught him, surviving on skills passed down through generations of desert survival. For months, he moves like a ghost across the American landscape, avoiding towns, living off the land, driven by an obsession to return to the mountains where his spirit belongs. When Maasai finally reaches Arizona, he discovers that his world no longer exists. The camps where he played as a child are now cattle ranches. The springs where his mother taught him to pray are fenced off as private property. Ranchers shoot Apache on sight, no questions asked, believing that any Indian off the reservation is automatically hostile. He becomes a phantom haunting his own homeland, reduced to raiding isolated homesteads for food, while dodging bounty hunters who've put a price on his head. But survival isn't just about individual resistance. It's about preserving cultural knowledge under conditions designed to erase it completely. In the prison camps, Apache women like Teda and Huera become the keepers of traditions that government policy is systematically trying to destroy. They teach daughters beadwork patterns that contain encoded prayers, passing down spiritual knowledge disguised as craft instruction. They maintain medicinal plant wisdom even though the plants don't grow in Oklahoma, preparing for a future when their people might return to lands where traditional healing could save lives. These women understand something their captors don't. Culture isn't just ceremonies and languages. It's practical knowledge about how to survive, how to maintain human connections, how to raise children who remember they're part of something larger than themselves. While guards focus on preventing escape attempts, Apache mothers conduct a different kind of resistance, ensuring that essential knowledge travels from grandmother to granddaughter, despite every effort to break that chain. But even this quiet resistance faces its greatest test in 1918, when the influenza pandemic sweeps through military installations nationwide. At Fort Sill, the disease kills more Apache in 6 months than died in all their wars combined. Elders who carried irreplaceable oral traditions, master craftspeople whose skills took decades to develop, spiritual leaders who maintained connections to sacred places all gone, taking their knowledge with them into graves in Oklahoma soil that will never feel like home. Geronimo himself dies 9 years earlier, in 1909, thrown from his horse during a drinking binge that speaks to the despair eating at his soul. His last words, according to witnesses, are a condemnation that echoes through history. "I should have never surrendered. I should have fought until I was the last man alive." They bury him in the Fort Sill Cemetery, thousands of miles from the sacred mountains where Apache spirits traditionally find rest. Finally, in 1913, 47 years after the Apache Wars began, the government releases the surviving prisoners. Of 442 people taken captive, only 261 remain alive. Most choose to stay in Oklahoma rather than return to an Arizona they no longer recognize, where their sacred sites have become tourist attractions, and their traditional water sources are controlled by cattle companies that view Apache claims as ancient history. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn toward hope. Today, more than a century later, Apache descendants have reclaimed something their captors thought they'd destroyed forever: food sovereignty. At reservations across the Southwest, elders teach young people to gather traditional foods, mescal hearts, piñon nuts, and acorns, and prepare them with the proper prayers their great-grandparents risked their lives to preserve. And in these teaching circles, the bacon and eggs story has become something remarkable, not a tale of defeat, but a lesson about the indestructible nature of Apache identity. Elders speak of those tears shed in the Florida mess hall, not with bitterness, but as proof that warriors can lose everything yet keep their spirits intact. They teach that grief and strength are not opposites, they're different faces of the same human capacity to survive the unsurvivable. The story reminds each new generation that they are the children of people who endured the longest imprisonment in Native American history and emerged with their souls unbroken. Those tears shed over alien food in a stone prison have become part of Apache oral tradition, proving that even in the darkest moments, memories of home can sustain the human spirit until the sun rises again on freedom.